Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode, wherever in the world you are listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on. Thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you guys for sharing this episode and this show around, and really looking forward to this episode here. In all of the episodes I've done, I was actually pretty surprised I've not done one on this specific topic. Today, I'm going to be talking with my guest about collaborating effectively with your staff. It's really fascinating to me that I haven't dedicated an episode to this because it's such an integral part to coaching and such an important part to what we do, because we don't coach in isolation. We coach with a staff, we coach with others, and we get their ideas, we share our ideas, and we work together to put the best possible product we can out there on the court, but also do the best we can with the players that we work with as players and as individuals. And so I wanted to dedicate this episode to that because there are so many interesting ideas that we can exchange and so many things we can learn and reflect on and just make us better coaches just through the way we talk with those on our staff and work with those on our staff. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic and really excited to hear some ideas, exchange some ideas, and hopefully help me collaborate better with those on my staff this coming year and in the future. So I'm very happy to be joined by the head boys basketball coach at Hoffman Estates High School, which is very near and dear to me as somebody who grew up right near Hoffman Estates. My guest today is Coach Peter McBride, or Pete McBride as he likes to be called, and I know he told me that, so I should have gotten it right the first time, but alas. Coach McBride, how are we doing today?
Mike, it's good to hear from you. I appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Really excited to actually collaborate and share some ideas with you about sharing ideas and collaborating with your staff as well. Before we get into that, Coach, let's go ahead and get started with your coaching journey. Where's the game taking you? Where's your coaching journey taking you? And what led you to Hoffman Estates?
Sure. So I'm actually a ESL teacher and a head boys basketball coach at Hoffman Estates High School, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago in Illinois. Really my coaching journey started in 2011, where I coached the feeder program at Prospect High School, where I graduated from in 2008. So I coached the sixth grade team there, which really helped me realize I really enjoy this and I want to keep doing this and I want to make a career out of it. After that, I graduated college in 2012 from North Park University in Chicago. And started job hunting, and I graduated with a degree in elementary education with minors in math and Spanish. So that allowed me to teach at an elementary school or a middle school, but I really had aspirations to coach at the high school level. And I quickly learned just throughout my stops, I started coaching high school at Maine East High School, where I assisted the varsity for 4 years. And during that time, I made stops at middle schools in Waukegan and Evanston, teaching middle school math. So after 4 years of that, I really wanted to see where coaching could take me. So I spent a year at North Park University as a graduate assistant. And I just wanted to see if the college game was for me. And it was also an opportunity to earn my master's degree and to have it paid for. So during that time, I also received my ESL endorsements, which is English as a second language, which allowed me to teach K through 12 and get into a high school. And, the ultimate goal for me was to, live a life where I'm teaching and coaching in the same building and running a program at a place that I teach at. And this really afforded me kind of that opportunity. So I graduated early from North Park with my master's, spent a year coaching at St. Charles East High School, where I was job hunting for a teaching position. And I got hired at Hoffman Estates in January of 2018, and there was just no coaching position available. Yeah. Fortunately, there was an opening at Schaumburg High School just 5 minutes away. So I spent 2 years teaching at Hoffman and coaching at Schaumburg. So that was great. It posed its challenges, commuting and walking the halls of Hoffman, knowing you're game planning for them that week. Seeing familiar faces and whatnot. And it was 2 great years of experience at Schaumburg. Eventually, an opening came up at Hoffman as the head sophomore coach in 2020, which was a challenging year for everybody, in addition to kind of coaching. So that's where I was led into the coaching world at Hoffman. So I spent a year as the head sophomore coach there before taking over the program in 2021.
That is a lot of stops along
It's a
the
lot of
way,
stops.
but
Yep.
I'm sure you picked up something unique at each of those different stops that probably you use currently at Hoffman, right?
No doubt about it. If you really reflect on the places I've been, the experiences I've had with various students, various athletes, various communities, I really felt like it equipped me to thrive at a place like Hoffman. And it really made me appreciate the building, the place, the culture. And I'm really enjoying every step of the way. I really felt like I was groomed and prepared and equipped for this job.
And let me ask about your experience when you were taking over as the you said it was a sophomore coach, right? Was that in 2020?
That's right.
What was that like as you were navigating through COVID? I'm always curious about different coaches' experiences, especially when they take a new position or took a new one
Right.
in 2020. What that was like? How did you sort of navigate that and kind of keep the ship afloat with everything that was going on in the world?
Oh man, it was navigating a whole lot of changes, really just focusing on what we have control over, which wasn't a whole lot in 2020. So it was a lot of learning about the program at the moment, learning about what we could do, what we couldn't do. And we were fortunate to have kind of a shortened season where we had, we were only able to play certain schools within a certain mile radius, playing with masks, having different mandates of, contact, no contact. There were periods where we could only do skill work. We couldn't play defense, and just kind of being flexible with that and making adjustments, just being appreciative that we were able to play at all.
Right.
Was really what we focused on, and just trying to give our athletes, a good experience through some less than ideal circumstances.
Yeah. And I like that idea though, of just being grateful that you're playing it all and you're together at all. And I'm sure that sense of just being able to play basketball probably meant so much to your guys, just to have that somewhat sense of normalcy and definitely
Right.
an abnormal world. That must have been really nice for them. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
Now, I also really enjoy when I hear coaches talk about different sayings or different mantras or different phrases that have a lot of meaning to them and their program. And I know that is something that applies to you as well. And one of the things that you mentioned to me was this mantra, this word Ubuntu, which I've heard before, but those listening might not be familiar with that term. So first off, what does the term Ubuntu even mean? And what does that also mean to your program? And how does it kind of work your way into your program's culture and philosophy?
Yeah, I appreciate that question a lot. It's this is something that means a lot to me, and it's started to mean a lot to our guys over time. So Ubuntu is a South African mantra that loosely translates to I am because we are, or a person is a person through other people. And it was really adapted as an ideology in post-apartheid South Africa, in an effort to bring harmony and unity among its many racial and ethnic groups. And I don't know how many people know this, but Hoffman Estates was just named the most diverse high school in the state. And as an English as a second language teacher, I've just grown so passionate about incorporating culture and celebrating our diversity and using it as a strength to unify people and teams and groups. And it felt right for our school. It felt right for me. It felt right for our program. And when the job opened up at Hoffman Estates and I began preparing, I thought, the best place to start is our culture and identity. What do we want to be known for? Who do we want to be, et cetera, how we want to play. And, I think it's so important to have that, you kind of call it your North Star, is where do you go? What do you point to when things are good, when things get difficult? And we thought that was a good place to start. And, I'm a firm believer that when you know who you are, you know what to do. And, over the years, you'll have different players with different abilities and strengths. And what you run and how you play, that's going to change over time depending on what you have. But one thing that should never change is your program identity and your values and your culture over time. So we want to be known for being we driven, selfless people on and off the court, and hopefully what they take from being a part of our program, is being selfless individuals, being good sons, putting your family first. And everyone has an identity. You're a member of different groups. You're a member of a family. You're a member of friends. And you're a member of this team. And I think basketball is such a great vehicle for life lessons. And in a sport that is so quick to, and it's so easy to kind of praise ego and individual accolades and different things like that. We hope the philosophy of Ubuntu can really help prepare our guys for life on the court and off the court. So it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to our guys. And we thought it really translated to not only how we play, but how we behave, how we behave at school, in the classroom, in the community. If we recognize that our identity is a part of something bigger than ourselves, I think it translates to the way we play. And I think then it dictates our behaviors, and hopefully it kind of prepares them to be good people off the court as well.
Did you find that implementing that did that come easy? Was there a lot of buy-in right away, or what was the process of kind of implementing that sort of culture into your program?
Yeah, again, it's something that sounds great initially and that everyone wants to buy into, but it takes work, and it takes a lot of modeling on our end, and it takes a lot of reflection and a lot of intentional work and conversations, and just being vulnerable with the guys, and I think it starts with me. I think it starts with our staff and making sure that we have the right people leading our guys and modeling that behavior on a consistent basis. I think it has a lot to do with praising that when you see behaviors that exhibit our culture and who we want to be, praising that effort, praising that behavior. And I think that which gets praised gets repeated. And so again, just like anything new, it's going to take time and it's going to take its bumps, and you're going to catch yourself slipping. But again, if it's something you really believe in and it's something you continue to hammer, it's something you can easily go back to when things get difficult.
Yeah, excellent. I really like that. And I know that that's something that I can definitely tell you're committed to, and you're going to be really working through that and really refining it. And it's going to definitely become the almost anchor to everything that you got going on in your program. And so no, that sounds awesome. And it's a word that I've heard before, but I've never actually heard it used in like a coaching context before. So that's really cool. No, that's awesome too. And I like how it ties into your work as an ESL teacher. I can definitely see how you kind of brought all those worlds together. And I learned something new about Hoffman Estate's diversity today, because that is new to me. Awesome.
Yep.
When it comes to working and collaborating with your staff, so I know you've also worked on many different staffs as well, so I'm sure you have experience that you drew from as you were taking over as the head boys coach. But what was your process of kind of getting to know your staff and figuring out their strengths, figure out the way to work together and use everyone's talents? Because that's a challenge. So I'm curious about what that process was like for you, and how that worked out for you as you started taking over the program.
Absolutely. So I got hired in late May of 2021, which gave me about a week and a half to meet the guys and assemble a staff before summer camp started in early June. Especially here in Illinois, June is a big month, for our development, for guys' exposure. It's when summer camps happen, a lot of shootouts, tournaments, things like that. So, just through my experiences, I knew the importance of June, and we had to work quickly. So, it was a lot of phone calls, text conversations across the building and outside the building to at least get enough to get us through summer camp, making sure that we had our varsity covered, that we had our lower levels covered and whatnot. And we had our staff 100% finalized actually in the early fall. So,
Wow.
To answer your question, my process was a long one. But as far as getting to know my staff, it was a lot of one-on-one conversations just regarding coaching philosophies, why they coach, what they want out of coaching, learning about their backgrounds, and kind of using that to determine the best fit for each position. And I think it's so important, when creating a staff and getting to know your staffs, that number one is that your vision, you have a shared vision, and that your why you coach is at least in line. We had some moving parts early on, but ultimately we were really pleased with, who we had and where we had them, because they were all in line with the mission and vision. Regardless, if someone is a teacher or not, you have to be a teacher of the game and a teacher of life. And all of our guys are student centered. They understand process, they understand a growth mindset. And I think just having the right people on board was first and foremost to me. And as far as using everyone's talents, I think it's important to know your staff well enough to know what everybody brings to the table, but also I think it's important to be mindful of what are they looking for in coaching. Sure. Are they content being a lower level coach? Do they want to run a program someday? Are they, different abilities, different skills, what they know about the game, areas of growth. And I think it's important that we're in tune with that and we're having conversations about that. So I think, for example, I have two guys that are maybe 2 years out of college, and, they're really looking to grow within the profession. And I think it's my job to make sure that I am giving them resources and giving them also opportunities to lead, and helping them grow any way I can, and just kind of understanding where they're at with coaching, where they'd like to go, but making sure that we're all driving in the same direction. And then we all have the same mission to grow the program, that we're students and athletes first, and that we're relationship driven. And, I think a lot of our conversations, I always start with, kind of sharing the vision and seeing how they feel about it. Seeing if that's in line with what they want out of coaching, and if they're on board, if removing all egos, and we're just kind of in line with that. I think that's number one.
When you took over, were there staff members who already were working at the school, or were you in a situation where it was kind of like a brand new staff that was in it as you took over the job?
That's a great question. So when I got the job, that's where I started with, the staff before me, kind of checking in with that. We had some people who had planned on leaving, even before they knew that there was a job change. There were different people kind of interested in the job, in addition to me. So it was having a lot of those conversations and making sure that we had some coverage in the building, but also, making sure that if we reached outside of the building, that, number one, people were able to get there, get to school, that their work schedules were flexible enough. So we ended up having 4 of us were teachers in the building, and there was one coach who was outside of the building.
I think that's just incredibly powerful to have a staff where you have so many who are actually in the building and are seen and are visible. Like I imagine that does like a lot of good to know that you got this staff that's like they're around and they're there and the kids see them, and I'm sure that really helps players know like, wow, like these guys, they really care about me, they work the school, I can see them, I can go talk to them. Like I'm sure that has a tremendous positive impact on the program.
Yeah, and it shows that we're teachers first.
Yeah,
we love coaching, but my goodness, teaching, coaching's a very small portion of my income. And I think if we, when we communicate to student athletes that they're students first, I think it's really helpful that they see that we're teachers first. So just kind of seeing us in an academic setting, keeping tabs on them and checking in on them in the halls, utilizing free periods. It's been really beneficial for us to just kind of see our guys on that consistent basis.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm really glad that you're in that situation. And as you think about your practice planning and game planning. So something that's really interesting is you are taking over this position a year ago, and you're working on your your practice planning, your game planning, the system that you want to put in with your program, while at the same time also making sure that you are working with your staff and making sure that what you're doing, everyone's on the same page and on board with. So what were those conversations like as you started to think about your practice planning and implementing your system and game planning? How did you kind of balance your personal vision when it came to how you wanted to run practice and game planning, but also at the same time implementing input from your staff as well? What were those conversations like?
That's a great question. So our staff is made up of myself. I have an assistant. I have a head sophomore coach, and I have 2 freshman coaches. We have an A team and a B team. And last year in the preseason, we talk about, a lot of general practice planning with regards to, communicating different routines, like, for example, at the beginning of practice, we always start in the jump circle. We create a circle, and that's kind of where we communicate a thought for the day. We kind of preview the practice plan, different things like that, logistics. So we always start and end in the jump circle. And that's something that was important to me. And I think you just kind of want to make sure it's little things like that you want in line throughout the program. How we do a break, recommended practice progression, kind of how we like to start, different warm-ups, how we like to finish, when we talk about defense, when we talk team stuff. So we try to give our coaches a lot of flexibility with that, but at the same time, especially early on, it was a lot of modeling on my end and kind of showing how we want things done at the varsity level. And I think another thing that's important with having the right staff is making sure that everyone's vision is preparing guys to play varsity. A lot of that requires a degree of selflessness that a lot of coaches might not have. So I think having people that are their purpose within what they do is in line with how you want them to play and who you want them to be. So we talked through some, kind of, I hate to call them non-negotiable drills, but drills and things that I really want taught, and the ways that we teach them. I provide my practice plan format, and I have a shared Google Doc that I share with the whole staff to kind of show them so that they always have access to what we're doing, and they can always kind of check in and to kind of model how we do things. And hopefully they can kind of take different ideas we have, but I also want them to feel like they have the freedom to meet the needs of their team. I think a lot of coaches go back and forth on, okay, we want our whole program running the same offense throughout. And I see a lot of value in that. But the truth is, you're going to have different classes of players with different talents, So what I'm running right now, that could change year after year. And I think if I force that on my whole staff, I'm not sure that's doing my job. So I think it's my job to give them options, flexibility, but also, being who they are within what we do and where we're going. So I think it's about having a lot of conversations about our personnel. For example, last year we had a freshman group that had a lot of athletes. They had a lot of guys who can get to the rim, a lot of guards. So we had to talk about kind of what was best for them. And by the time they get to me, I don't know if we'd be running what I was running with the current varsity group. So I think that collaboration and giving our coaches that freedom and showing them that I have confidence in them and their ability to kind of do what's best for that group in particular, I think that pays dividends to and really shows kind of our buy-in and commitment to each other. So that's kind of how we went in terms of X's and O's. We have a huge kind of coaches packet that provides all of our terminology and philosophies and things like that. And, that's a Google Doc for a reason because, we're always looking to tweak and make changes.
Document.
And so, I'm always looking for feedback on that. Guys are always open to kind of provide suggestions with that, kind of as we grow this thing over time. So
you had to as you kind of mentioned, I know you the term non-negotiables. I'm kind of with you sometimes that term, but you did have to make that decision, right? About like, okay, but these are the things that are really important to me, and these are the things that I really, really would like to make sure are being implemented and being run.
Right.
So what was that process of you making that decision and thinking about the things that like you really, really wanted to emphasize and make sure were known and done program wide? Because I know that that's a challenge to kind of think like, here's what I really, really want to make sure I do, but here are things that I'm perfectly fine giving more autonomy to. So what did you, I guess, finally decide as like these are the things that like I really, really want to emphasize and I really want to make sure that everybody in the program is aware of and knows?
Sure. I think it's a great question. I think a lot of, I think your terminology should be consistent throughout, how you teach different things. I also think just emphasizing things culturally. I think a lot of that is more kind of where I lean in terms of non-negotiables more so than X and O, if that makes sense. And making sure that our identity is consistent throughout. So I think making sure that we're at least communicating, a simple example is, just kind of teaching how we teach closeouts, or our color system on scout reports. We talk about red, yellow, and blue, just what that means, and it kind of just helps us grow throughout the program. And as kids get to me after a few years, that's how we take that next step, because this has already been taught and this has already been covered. We're solid here. Let's take that kind of next step. So I think it's fluid. But I also think that requires a lot of conversations with your staff to see how that's going. And again, going back to making sure that you have the right people on board, people that you're comfortable having difficult conversations with, people, and establishing kind of that rapport where you're learning from each other. Because kind of as you led with, it is an entire staff thing. It's a we thing. And going back to our culture of Ubuntu, that's a way I can model that. This is our program. This isn't my program. This is our program. And where do we want to go with this?
And I really like one of the parts that you mentioned about the terminology, because I think that that's probably something that can save you a lot of time as a coach when you can just say, certain words or certain phrases or whatever
Right.
terms that you want to use, and the players like automatically know like what that's referring to. I'm sure that
Right.
saves you so much time, just be able to like give a couple words, couple phrases. Okay, now we're good, and now we can get into what we need to, because you know what I mean by saying that particular word or phrase, whatever that may be.
Absolutely. I think it really makes for smoother practices, smoother transitions, and really, develops some fluidity and continuity in a program that kind of just got started, under our leadership. So we thought that was really important early on to be on the same page with that, and kind of give it a chance and see how it goes. And we think if we're very consistent with how we teach things and what we teach early on, we can really see how this thing grows.
As we think about game planning, I know that some coaches are very big on looking at film and breaking down film and kind of doing that, and some do it more in isolation. Some they delegate and have a process of that. What's the process of game planning and game preparation in terms of how much do you do? How much does your staff get incorporated with that? What is that like?
Well, I love game planning. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. And, one thing that I think is interesting, and I was intentional to mention earlier, is, understanding what your staff wants out of this,
Yep.
And making sure that you're not putting too much on your staff and kind of burning them out if this isn't quite what they signed up for, and putting people in positions according to that, So, an example of that is, I watch a ton of film. My assistant watches a ton of film, and my sophomore coach is really interested in what the varsity is doing, so kind of using guys based on their strengths, based on what they want out of their coaching experience. That really helps me to delegate. And it's something I'm still learning. But it also, I think, depends on your group. I think, there are some groups that are going to handle scouting and game planning much better than others. There are other groups where you can just kind of do what you're going to do and focus on you and the other team has to adjust to what you're doing. I think early on it was a lot of trial and error, figuring out, how much game planning can our team handle? How much do we focus on us versus who we're about to play? How much time do we have? How much film can they handle while still staying engaged? And a lot of that was a process. And, it was kind of that adjustment from what they were used to, what we're trying to do, while still keeping them fresh and motivated, so with regards to using my staff, we have a big group chat. It's a lot of texting, it's a lot of email chains, it's a lot of one-on-ones, and just kind of having that constant conversation of what can our guys handle, where are we right now, what do we need to focus on, and what's best for our group right now.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that point about something that I think it's really important to remember is you talked about, what did my staff sign up for? What is it that they're looking to get out of this? And I think that it's definitely easy if you're in a head coaching position to think that, these people on my staff, they're as bought in and they're going to, put as much time and can put as much time in this as I do. But then you think about it and you reflect on it, right? And you're like, well, maybe that's not what they're here for. Maybe that's not something they can commit to or want to. And maybe, their wants or their interests, their needs, and the time that they're going to necessarily be able to commit probably won't necessarily be the same as mine, as a head coach. Right. And that's something that I think it's a really fascinating kind of insight and thing to reflect on is, how much can I realistically, right, like ask of my staff to do, knowing that, ultimately I'm the head coach and there's a certain level of responsibility I have that at the end of the day, they're not responsible for, and kind of always kind of keeping that in mind. I think that that's a really actually fascinating thing to, for head coaches to like reflect on or think about.
Yeah, I think, an example is one of my lower level coaches. He's got 6 kids at home, and to, so, and a lot of it, like the way our schedule is kind of unique, where our freshmen always play on Saturdays and oftentimes our varsity plays on Fridays. Now, if I ask him to be at every Friday night varsity game and then wake up and coach, help coach both freshman teams that Saturday, that's a lot of time away from his family. And I'm not going to keep him for very long. If I'm asking too much out of them, or if I'm taking them away from their families, I have a 9-month daughter here at home, and I'm learning more and more just kind of about that healthy balance, Sure. So I think so much of that is, after you've got the right people, kind of really getting to know them and their situations and making sure that they're living healthy, balanced lives. And I think I'm responsible for a lot of that, so I think finding the right people and understanding where they belong and what they can do for you while still keeping them fresh and engaged and motivated and excited, and that it's fun for them.
And it's almost directly translates to like your players as well, right? Not burning them out and not, overwhelming them, and making sure that it's still fun for them in the same way. It's almost like exactly what you want to do with your staff, is kind of just balancing, like their work-life balance and making sure Yes. that they're still engaged and happy, and when they they're excited when they're there on the court. So yeah, absolutely. It was just really funny, your response. It's like, yeah, that's exactly how in some cases we are with players too, making sure Absolutely. We don't burn them out as well.
Absolutely.
What do you need from your staff when you are in the middle of a game, when you're coaching? What is it that you enable your staff to do or ask your staff to do when you're basically in-game coaching?
Yeah, I've kind of like you mentioned, I've been on a lot of different staffs. I've made a lot of different stops on my way, and I've been on staffs where each coach kind of has a defined role, and maybe you're charting something or keeping stats. And I found that when I've done that, you spend a lot of time with your head down, and you miss a lot of the game. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I just remember, when I felt most valued as an assistant was when I'm engaged, and watching the game in a different light. So we're fortunate to have several student managers, and this is, this is in large part, due to my predecessor who had, built this culture of, managers that want to be a part of the program. And that's something we wanted to continue. So, we have a lot of different student managers that help us chart different things and who enjoy being utilized in roles like that. Things like rebound differential, shot chart, we count pass totals, fouls, turnovers, et cetera. And that's a way that we help our managers feel valued and keeps them engaged. And this kind of frees up my assistants to be engaged in the game, in kind of a different way. And, I often have my assistants look through the different things we chart, at timeouts or beginning of halftime. And I think their job is to kind of provide some context to them and how we can use that information. So, I think their number one job for me and the way they help me best is just to provide energy, to be engaged in the game, engaged with our bench. Because that's one thing I think is very challenging for a head coach. When you're watching the game, it's really hard to, manage your bench, to check our body language, to, check on guys, to have those one-on-one conversations during games, that they're engaged throughout halftime, and just let them feel empowered, like they have a voice. I want them to feel a part of this. I want everybody all in all the time. So I know there are different philosophies on that. That happens to work for me. I'm kind of a guy who just likes having a lot of people involved, a lot of voices, and just kind of ultimately making sure that there's a filter system, that I'm not getting too many voices all at once. Everything has to go through my assistant. If my sophomore coach has an idea, if a player sees something, whatever, if the scorekeeper, who has something, run it by my assistant who kind of filters that information and tells me all that. And that's worked for us.
And I like what you mentioned about, having to be engaged and having something to do or having something that they can, kind of be involved in and do. Because one of the traps that, I've seen, and I don't think it's anybody's fault, it's just one of those things that happens, is sometimes you see situations where whether it's like assistants who aren't maybe necessarily as engaged because they're given specific tasks to do, or sometimes what I see are sometimes assistants who maybe are disconnected in a way from the varsity players, to the point where the varsity players don't really like talk to them, or there's not really like a good rapport or a good relationship to that. But it sounds like in your situation that you emphasize and work on a lot to make sure that your assistants and your staff are people that your players can talk to, and that there's a respectful conversation and a productive conversation that can happen where one of your players can talk to somebody on your staff and get something out of it and have something meaningful happen, which I think could probably really be powerful for your program.
I think that's so important. I think that's a really great point. If there's, a lot in our exit interviews, kind of at the end, just kind of reflecting with each of our coaches, the ones who were able to sit on our bench most often, one thing they continued to say is they just appreciated just the opportunity and they loved the way they were treated by our varsity guys. And I think that speaks a lot to the character of guys that we have, that they're coachable by everybody. There's not some, system where it's like, oh, well, McBride didn't say it to me, so it's not as important. I think showing that unity and modeling that with our players is so important. And I really think, just like, kind of like we continue to go back to just having the right people in your corner and having their purpose in line with yours. And when you have a staff that is in line with why you do, what you're communicating, it certainly makes that a lot easier, because players are receiving information that we're all on board with, or it's something they've heard before. And having assistants that are in tune with the game plan, that are really focused and have good relationships with our guys. That's something that's important to me, because the relationship that I might have is often very different than one that your assistant might have or the sophomore coach might have. But, we're a whole staff, level doesn't really matter.
I like that a lot. Do you do any kind of like reflection with your staff after a game? Do you kind of like talk about what happened, what you saw, good, bad, or otherwise, or are those conversations taking place? And if so, like when do they happen? Where do they happen? Like sort of what do they look like after a game?
Definitely. If there's one thing I've learned is, most often after you talk to your team after a win or a loss, whatever, it's always the coaches are last ones in the locker room or team room or whatever. And, you reflect initially, and oftentimes it's emotional thinking after a big win. Everything's great. After a loss, you're frustrated about a lot of things. So we really try to kind of keep it brief afterwards until we've watched the film. I think, or at least slept on it. I think it's really important that we approach our reflections with a clear head, and that we're not approaching it with over the top emotions. Cause right after a game, it's really hard to have total 20/20 vision on the game, on the situation. But, there's always conversations afterwards just to kind of check in. And if there's anything important to kind of go over before the next day, we try to have those conversations immediately.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to have those conversations immediately right away. Sometimes you don't necessarily have the most productive insight after a game when emotions are running high or whatever. But yeah, I think that something that was interesting that I've been through and seen that was really powerful are those staffs who are enabled to kind of tell like the head coach, like, hey, like, this is something we could do better. This is something we clean up, kind of empowering their voice a bit if there's something that they see. And I think that those head coaches who are willing to be able to hear like, hey, like, maybe I didn't do this right, and I need somebody on my staff to tell me like, hey, maybe we could have done this better. Maybe we like could have done this, and this is what I saw. Like maybe this is something we can work on, and really enabling your staff to be able to kind of offer those critiques or those suggestions, I think is really, really powerful if the head coach is willing to listen to that and really will work to implement that. And it sounds like that's something that you're definitely open to.
Yeah. And I remember, in my years being an assistant, I always just was so grateful any time I was able to feel heard or offer my insight. I remember I worked for, a head coach who, we'd talk afterwards, and then, usually on the ride home, I'd get a phone call and he'd just say, what do you got for me? And, that would usually lead to a pretty long conversation, but I always appreciated those as an assistant. And I think, just kind of my experiences through that and knowing how valuable that makes someone feel. And also just kind of hammering down, like, this is a we thing. I love that you continue to use that pronoun, with regards to staff. Cause, I want my guys to know that I do value their opinion, and we're going through this together. This is not a me thing. And I think it all goes back to relationships and making sure you have the right people on board.
100% agree with that. So for some of the new coaches or those who are listening who are aspiring to become a head coach, what advice would you give to an upcoming head coach when it comes to building their staff and being a leader on their staff?
Sure. I think first thing and probably most important thing is focusing on getting the right people. People that are in line with your vision, your mission, and your purpose. I saw a quote a few weeks back, I think it was by Simon Sinek. He said, you don't hire for skills, you hire for attitude. And that's really stuck with me. And, I think, you can always teach the game. There are so many resources out there and different ways that you can learn basketball. And you can communicate and demonstrate how you want the game taught, what you want to run, your terminology, et cetera. But none of that matters if you don't have the right people in your corner who believe in the vision. You can have a great basketball mind on your staff, but if he or she are not in line with your vision, your mission, your purpose, your why, or if they're not bought into you, then it's going to be difficult to see eye to eye on the things that really matter. As far as being a leader of a staff, I think once you've gotten the right people on board, it's really important to start by clearly communicating the culture, standards, vision and philosophies you have for the program and kind of running it by them. I think uniquely last year, with it being year one, it was a lot of me early on, and I wasn't super comfortable with that. I'm a very collaborative person.
Sure.
But we have the right people in front of us that want to hear what I think, and I was like, well, here's what I think, but let's talk about this, and I think it's clearly communicating that. And I think it was important for me to communicate that in interviews, in conversations before bringing those people on board. And it's really like, hey, if this sounds good to you, you're going to be great. We can teach the game, we can talk basketball and all of that later. But making sure that their philosophies are in line with yours and the parts that really matter. And having people that are intentional on making sure all levels are in line with regards to things like practice and game routines, practice and game planning, how you want things taught, and terminology, all those things we talked about, making sure that everyone, kind of has that same mission to prepare kids for that. And I think as a head coach, it's our job to model those standards and also to provide support to our staff throughout their journey. But at the same time, I've learned that great leaders are great listeners. And they have great relationships. And, I think it's important for leaders to kind of be vulnerable and to be open to feedback and to give your staff a platform and the confidence to be heard. So I think it starts with having the right people, and doing a lot of work to make sure they're the right people, and then maintaining and building those relationships over time. And, just being a good listener, being open to feedback, making sure your people feel valued, and that that it is a culture of we, that it's not some hierarchy. That's just not my style. I've never gotten along with that kind of leadership. It's not who I am. It's not who I've been often as an assistant, and it's that's the culture I want to create. And I think when your players watch that, your players notice, your players can tell if your staff gets along. Your players watch how your staff interacts. Absolutely. They can tell those kind of things. You can't fake it. So I think it's so important. You don't have to be best friends, but you do need a relationship. You need a collaborative working relationship. There needs to be open dialogue. There needs to be constant communication and checking in with them and making sure that you're supporting their livelihood. And, just kind of creating the atmosphere you want and the right people to model the right behaviors for your players.
And as you mentioned, very little in your response, and I agree with it. It had to do with anything really like basketball related, because as you mentioned, right, like I can teach you the basketball part, or I can show you like what it is that you need to do in the basketball sense. But as you mentioned, kind of like being bought into like me as a person, because, and I'm sure that you've seen this or are well aware of this, that you could have very easily, coaches who undermine each other, who don't believe in each other, completely divide the team. And at that point, when that happens, I don't know if you ever get them back once, coaches are undermining each other and people are picking sides. I think at that point, it's almost, I don't know if it's salvageable at that point or not.
Totally agree.
And how much of your philosophy about what you want from a staff and working from a staff comes from your previous experience? How much did you draw on or reflect on from your previous stops along the way to formulating the philosophy that you currently have now when it comes to working with a staff?
Oh, it's all of it. I think it's so important that we draw from our experiences. And when you have a wide range, kind of like I do, over time you kind of develop, with the sight of, with the end game of wanting to be a program leader one day, always reflecting on, man, I want to make sure my staff feels like that, or man, I know I don't like that feeling. So I'll never do that. You kind of take bits and pieces of who you want to be, who you don't want to be. You take different things, you leave different things. And I think that's what experience is all about, and I think it's so valuable to have a wide range of experiences with different types of leadership, different people, different places. So I think for me, it's just so important to reflect on how I felt best utilized, how I felt most effective, most empowered, most confident, as a coach, and when I felt most supported. And I really want to take that and make sure that my guys feel the same.
And you mentioned right before how one of the experiences that you felt really valued as an assistant, right, was when you were given something to do. And I feel like that's something that stuck with you, if I'm correct, when you were given something to be engaged in, especially in a game situation. And you directly translated that to something that you wanted to implement with your staff, where you're currently at right now, correct?
Yeah, one example, one thing that I thought was kind of cool was, I've had different staffs, like I think one thing that's kind of common is having different coaches watch different sides of the ball,
Yeah.
So I feel my strength, and maybe just where I enjoy the game more, is I'm really into offense, so I love that X and O piece, thinking of new ways, different, I'm into skill development, all those things. And so that kind of leaves my assistant with defense, so we have we had that conversation. I said, okay, well, if you're kind of, you see something in practice, if we're doing something live, that's on you to kind of watch what we're doing and watching that side of the ball, and that's a way to make sure that he's always engaged, and that he knows what to watch. I think if your roles aren't really defined, it can be really easy to just kind of fade into the background at practice, or in games even,
or step all over each other.
Right. So, I'm really intentional about, giving him different segments of practice. Like, hey, we're looking at this amount of time. What do you think we need to work on? Oh, okay. Well, we're seeing a lot of dribble drive, this week. Let's talk about on-ball defense. Let's talk about our stunts. Let's talk about our gaps, and I give him kind of that freedom in that segment of practice. Or, sometimes we'll create breakdowns, we'll be like half of you with me, half of you with coach. And we each do a breakdown, then we switch him, and, just kind of giving him that platform to teach, giving him that platform to lead and have players comfortable with him, coaching them and teaching them. I think that really helps with our collaborative relationship, and also his relationship with our players, and them viewing him as another leader, not just my number two, so that's just one way we're still working on it, but that's one way I really like to kind of collaborate.
Excellent. Before we hit our concluding segment, I did want to ask, as you kind of are now entering year 2, I know you talked about last year is a lot of kind of trying to implement things, kind of work everything out and get everybody on board and kind of install basketball wise and culture wise what you wanted to do. But as you start to build and move on to year 2, what are your hopes kind of for the way you and your staff are kind of working together? Is it building on all the things you did last year? Are there any like new things that you're trying to like build as new layers? What do you kind of look for as you think about year 2 when it comes to working with your staff?
That's a great question. We graduated 8 guys last year at the varsity. And a lot of them were, just about all of them were about key contributors, so our team has a lot of new faces. And so there's a lot of teaching that's needed to happen already in the summer, and just kind of in reflecting with our coaches, after last season, and as we prepare for the next one, we really want to kind of see where this thing goes, and kind of stay the course and continue what we've started. I don't know if that sounds totally naive or whatnot, or overconfident, but we do feel like we need to give what we started, a continued go, and to really see it through, continue our culture, because there's so much more we can do. And I think if we build upon what we started last year and kind of use that as a foundation, we continue to learn about our groups. We continue to learn about what our standards need to be, maybe how they need to change, how, different things we can improve upon or adjust. Like one thing I started doing is during camp, just in my reflections with some of my lower level coaches, it's really hard, when you want to have fluidity and continuity and you want them doing a lot of the things you're doing with the varsity. It's hard for them to always kind of swing by practice to kind of see what we do if we're practicing at the same time, and our, life gets crazy in the winter. One thing I did this summer and I would like to do this winter is we've started filming our practices and our camp days. I've kind of spent the last, couple weeks since camp ended just breaking down different drills and, creating like playlists, like, hey, here's a closeout segment we really like, here's a shell segment that's been really good for us, and kind of providing those resources for my staff and making sure that they have access to that information, instead of just talking about it, providing them those visuals. And I think we're going to continue to do it throughout the season, filming practices and breaking it down, and not only for us, but for our lower levels to kind of see, for our coaching staff and even players to kind of see how things are done at our level, and continuing just to work at creating that continuity and creating that foundation and building upon it as we keep doing this thing.
And I mean, if you believe in what you're doing and you believe in the culture that you're building, it only makes sense that you want to keep building on it, right? And you want to keep
right.
taking it to whatever that next level is. And
right.
And it obviously probably shows your guys in your program that it's something you believe in. You're not just blowing everything up after year one. It's like, no, what I said last year and what you heard about is something that we believe in, and we're going to continue doing it next year. So it'll be cool to kind of like see and learn about like kind of how it works, like the next phase of implementation or refinement with it. So no, that sounds awesome. To wrap up, Coach, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, so I'll go ahead and start here with this first one. When you think back to your coaching career, what is a moment that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
A story I've shared a few times is, when in 2020 during the pandemic, guys hadn't played basketball in a long time, but we had one of our practices, and so we had a unique schedule at school where we had like a half day of remote learning, and then there was like a study hall period. But during that time, guys could come to the gym, use the weight room, whatever, use that time however they want. It was between 1:30 and 3:00 p.m. So, and then we would have practice. So we had two of our guys came in to shoot and get extra work in, from like 1:30 to 3. I'm like, man, awesome, sweet, and then we had practice at 3, and practice started, and those two were nowhere to be found. Like, well, what that, these guys were here already. How did we lose them? Where did they go? And I learned that they went out to eat, trying to sneak in, lunch before practice. And I was angry. I took it personally. And I took it out on our guys, this long-winded conversation to guys who, were there. What was the point? So I was kind of preaching to the choir, but anyway, they had gotten back, and, I ended up, kind of having the group, and I took the two to the side, and I had the guys that were there run, and I had the other two watch, and thinking I was sending some big message, but I wasn't. Ultimately, upon further reflection, I'm realizing, well, I had just gotten to know these guys. We're fresh off a pandemic. We had no time to really communicate our standards, to really build that culture of trust, to kind of explain the significance of timeliness and being present and communicating. And really, I then learned that was the first thing they'd eaten all day. So instead of punishing, I've learned to just, take that time, use a teaching moment. Okay, well, what could you control about that situation? Okay, what could I have learned? What could our guys have done differently? And I just know that was a mistake of mine that I won't make again. And hopefully, moving forward, that's just a standard that we can have beforehand, and that our guys can be taught, so that something like that doesn't happen again. And I know there's, I remember when I was a player, I remember running for a very similar reason, for a teammate of ours, and I thought I was sending this message of, okay, one guy's late, we're all late, we all face the consequences, but I just think that's a very old way of thinking, and we can do better. and we can uphold high standards in different ways, more productive ways.
And as you mentioned, it's sometimes you have to really step back and think like, wait a minute, we even, like you mentioned, communicated what our standards are. We talked about this, we had those conversations yet. And yeah, like, yeah, I mean, I've been there before. I've done the exact same thing. Like, oh, somebody's late, so you all get to run because this person's late. And like you said, I was like, man, I thought I was like some like old school coach, instilling like all these like great values and everything. And I don't know, it's kind of silly actually, especially if it's not something you even maybe necessarily believe in, or like you don't maybe even know why you're doing it. You're just like, oh, like this seems like the right thing to do, and it's like,
right, it's totally not me, but for whatever reason, my frustration was just totally taken out in that moment. And it's a moment I reflect on, and I know the two kids to this day, and we laugh about it now. And,
it's kind of like the best resolution, all things considered, for that sort of situation. At least that like you got a good relationship with them and you can laugh about it. So
no
that's
question.
Good, at least. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox, and if you go longer, that's fine too. Your platform to get out kind of your final idea, a closing message, a closing thought, just something that you would like to leave the listeners with. Very open-ended and open to your interpretation. So I'm just going to give you the floor, and I'm just going to kind of let you take it from here.
Well, Mike, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. It's an honor that you reached out and you took the time to talk to me, and we have kind of the opportunity to have this conversation. I just think it's so important for coaches like us, coaches and teachers, to have a network of support where we can, chop it up like this in kind of a casual way and learn and grow as leaders and meet new people along the way. I think it's so important for our growth, and this coaching community, it's a special one. And I think the more we can lean on each other, the more we can learn from each other, the more we can communicate things like this. For me, just even communicating my vision and our culture, our philosophy, it's good for me, and it helps me to learn and continue to reflect. And I think that's what this is all about. So I'm just thankful that for the platform. I just appreciate you reaching out and taking the time to talk to me.
And I appreciate you, Coach, for being able to come on here and talk about working with your staff, talk about your journey, a little bit of reflection, how you work with your staff, implement the culture that you want to do, and a lot of really cool things to reflect on, and also about the culture and that mantra of Ubuntu, because again, that's something unique and something for me to kind of look into and kind of learn a little bit more about. So that's awesome. So Coach McBride, thank you so much for joining us to talk about all the things that I mentioned. Best of luck as you kind of work into year 2 and keep building with your culture and building with your staff, and best of luck going forward, even if it does mean having some success against my alma mater. That's okay. I won't hold it against you. Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, Mike. Much appreciated.
And thank you all for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.